we hate to, we're going to have to get you aboard the
Of Hadley Rill to the south.
I think we found what we came for.
Stop. Let's start with the space worm. This was a real 190-page feasibility study of using a lunar worm to wiggle across the moon. Why was the moon car a fantasy that became a reality, that became a $40 million car? I want to tell the story of the lunar rover on two levels, pairing some of the insane challenges to create it with the overlooked reasons it was even made. I think that we have only heard a part of this story. In the full one, it doesn't just explain the moon's greatest adventure, it explains how we got to where we are today. That is cool. Does this dust show up on camera? It's really dusty. This is my surface of the moon. There is actually a fascinating market. They're used for, as the website shows, testing stuff like rover design. I want to use this section to show how a lunar rover really was necessary to advance just science.
This layering gives scientists a direct look at the structure of the moon and a deeper insight as to the significance of the collected samples.
I'll focus on Apollo 15, but the rover was also used in Apollo 16 and 17, the last mission to go to the moon. Before that, they didn't know much about regolith, the layer of rock and dust on the surface. There were theories before the moon landing that people would just sink hundreds of feet into the ground. There'd be no crust beneath them. Oh no, I'm lost in the moon, crap. We also had no idea how fine or rocky the surface would be, and it turned out to be super rocky, super hilly, and with a really fine dust that was gonna be pretty hard to get traction on.
Got so much dust on my camera, I can hardly see the camera setting.
When the Soviet Luna 9 became the first object to leap softly on the moon, it transmitted the first images from the surface, but it also didn't sink. A lunar rover was a possibility. NASA began looking at proposals long before men walked on the moon in 1969.
Yeah, I'm gonna step off the limb now.
But the regolith that they wanted to study, it brought weird challenges that led to weird proposals that looked nothing like a traditional car. This is like legit science, and I want to show that I'm taking this pretty seriously. We're not going to do something silly like have a NASA engineer in a half shirt do a funny little skit. I mean, it's like legit stuff. That's hurtful. I'm just going to hide down here. My point was going to be that 1960s NASA engineers did not have to worry about identity theft and data brokers in the way they do today. But fortunately, Delete Me, today's sponsor, is here to help fix that problem. Today, there are data brokers that are buying and selling your data. You know this if you've gotten junk mail or spam. I'm particularly worried about being phished because I just imagine how much work it would take to fix it. But fortunately, Delete Me is on the case.
Somebody over there?
Okay, I think we're good. They will find your info and my info, and then they'll get it taken down. I actually saved an example from my report. There was this old address I had. I'd lived there maybe 18 years ago. I'd forgotten the address, but Delete Me found it, and now they will get it taken down. Thank you for sponsoring this video, Delete Me. You're best. Now go ahead and try Delete Me for yourself with my 20% off coupon.
Cool, dude.
Visit joindeleteme.com/Phil20 or snag that coupon code Phil20 to get started right now. Okay, thanks for listening. Now, let's go back to the moon.
To the untrained eye, it looked like just another rock.
So they really wanted to learn about the surface of the moon, and this rover could actually help them do it. For one, it gives them more time. So this guy in a spacesuit right here, he's pushing this heavy spacesuit around and he's using a lot of oxygen and also water. But the person in here in the rover gets to take a break. They're not using as much life support, and that means that the EVAs, extravehicular activities, can last longer. It also let them go way further on the moon. The 3 EVAs in Apollo 15, for example, had a distance of 17.5 miles, which vastly improved the type of rocks that they could get. It could also stow and transport hundreds of pounds of rocks. For Apollo 14, they had designed a lunar cart after considering a few very humorous options. They landed on one, but the modular equipment transporter couldn't do as much work as a moon car, and it still required the astronaut to expend a lot of energy and life support time. They were still taking small steps for a man.
One giant leap for mankind.
I know, sorry, I know. The point is, the rover could help a lot in getting more time to study the lunar surface, but the very thing that we wanted to see, it posed big challenges that required creative solutions. Astronauts had to deal with big slopes, unpredictable terrain, and lots of dust. Yeah, like this guy is covered in dust right now. I mean, they were kicking up dust constantly. If you look at the footage, you can see dust everywhere. And they're always talking about it on the mission tapes, about how the dust is getting on absolutely everything.
Mine's covered with dust too.
They had to come up with creative solutions. The lunar hopping transporter would use the hopping mode across the moon. It could have looked like this. And they also proposed the glorious lunar worm. It is crazy, but there's a logic to it, right? You had to navigate big slopes, like those shown in NASA photographs and in these maps of the moon. For a traditional vehicle, they considered donut wheels, tread wheels, and these kind of metal elastic cone wheels, but landed on these ones. The eventual design used custom wheels to get around all this. You can see them kicking up dust here. The first mobility performance report says more. These wheels look normal, but they had custom tweaks. Traditional tires wouldn't work without atmospheric pressure, and they wouldn't have traction. So these featured a woven piano wire mesh with titanium rivets, and it worked. The wheels navigated the dust and slopes and rocks, and that delivered important rock finds. Okay, so I'll be honest here. It doesn't matter how much of this lunar simulant I have huffed today. Moon rocks don't get me that excited, but you know, if you've looked through hundreds of pages of technical reports like I've kind of skimmed, or you've seen all the different documents that go with every single rock that they brought back, you start to realize that the science really was important to the people on Earth and also to some of the astronauts. So I don't want to give it short shrift, even though the rest of this video is a bit about the political reasons for the lunar rover.
Hey, look at that light-colored rock with almost looks like a white vein on top of the other rock. Yeah, look at that.
The first extravehicular activity on Apollo 15 featured a rock moment here, the so-called seatbelt basalt. It's called that because David Scott was so taken by a shiny rock, he lied to Mission Control that he was adjusting his seatbelt.
Hand me your seatbelt.
So he'd have time to snag the rock and stow it away.
What a beaut. That is really a beauty, and there's another one down there.
Genesis rock, found on the second
Maybe
EVA,
if you could put your scoop in it,
was
and break off the
reported
chip.
in the press because it was one of the oldest objects that humans had ever found.
I think I can get it with the tongs here. Yeah.
The moon rover was key in allowing that science to happen. In those 3 trips on Apollo 15, they added miles of coverage, which would have been impossible on foot. But I think that that is just the beginning of the story. It doesn't explain the politics behind a $40 million car.
It is September 8, 1960, dedication day for the George C. Marshall Space Flight Center.
This is a transfer ceremony in 1960. An Army rocket manufacturing facility becoming NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. That's in Huntsville, Alabama, and it's part of a web of locations that depended on this lunar rover being built. We aren't just seeing the building of a rover with this history. We are seeing the attempt to build a space industrial complex. The Saturn booster was symbolic of the Marshall Space Flight Center in the 1960s, a rocket manufacturing center. This wasn't Mission Control in Houston or Cape Canaveral in Florida, but its own outpost for rocket design. The web of places and companies connected to the lunar rover and Marshall Space Flight Center shows just how much investment and hope there was that space would be a big new industry. The rover was originally going to be made at Michoud Assembly Facility, a manufacturing facility in New Orleans. Later, those plans were scrapped. It still shows how NASA wanted its massive facility to be utilized to keep going, and how Marshall wanted to keep the rover nearby, a feature that not only let them barge rockets up the Mississippi River, but also decentralized control from Houston. This, in turn, connected to the work done at Cinder Lake, a moon simulating environment they built in Arizona, where astronauts trained and mobile labs were tested. Private companies really wanted a big space industry too, and as rocket building slowed, they saw the rover as a way to keep contract money flowing. The eventual winners of the rover contract, General Motors and Boeing, didn't rake in high profits from the $40 million budget, but they were playing a space long game. From their Santa Barbara and Kent, Washington facilities, they coordinated with Marshall Space Flight Center and Michoud. Pay attention to General Motors, the most profitable company ever in 1965. They thought space was a possible big new market. They weren't alone. Grumman out of Bethpage, New York, which had built the Lunar module, had rover proposals as well that look pretty novel today. As did Ohio's Bendix, which had an aerospace division in Ann Arbor and tested a lunar prototype. The point of mapping all these locations is not really that you remember any of them, but that you see that there is a web of interests that wanted the military-industrial complex to continue to be the space-industrial complex. They saw big opportunity in a big space industry. None of them wanted to be left behind, and the rover was an integral next step. For size purposes, the lunar rover popped out of the lunar module. It unfolded. Everyone was hoping that the industry would expand in the same way. Start small, but get bigger when it was needed. The rover happened because it represented a future industry, and that gets into why the government wanted it too.
Here to reveal a plan for a trip around the moon is the chief of the guided missile development at the United States Army's Redstone Arsenal, Dr. Werner von Braun.
I'm going to explain the lunar rover's amazing navigation system, but I want to get in another political chunk too, because I don't think you can understand the lunar rover without understanding the bigger politics behind it.
A voyage around the moon must be made in 2 phases.
Werner von Braun had been recruited to the Army and then NASA through Operation Paperclip, a plan to bring German scientists to the United States, including members of the Nazi Party and even the SS, like von Braun.
He was also overall director of the development of the original V-2 rocket.
Von Braun is key not just because of his power, but because of his obsession with people living on Mars. That interest perfectly meshes with the American space race against the Soviets. In the early 1950s, von Braun wrote what I can only call hard sci-fi about life on Mars. And yes, it is a biblical reference, but he even said that the people in charge on Mars would be called the Elon. It's in the book. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, von Braun proselytized about the necessity of a space base on the moon and on Mars.
The experiments we are making today are helping us to solve the more complex problems to come.
He was maybe most famous for proposing a wheel-like space station, but he made a big case for moon and Mars bases. Von Braun continued to argue in print and on TV, even explicitly recommending a moon jeep. This techno-optimism aligned perfectly with the Army's dreams of having a competitive advantage over the Soviet Union. That meant a moon base. Project Horizon was a 1959 proposal to establish a lunar outpost, and even in this grainy photocopy, you can see that they imagined a lunar rover. All this worked in convincing the public and NASA that a rover was essential for a base. Look at this document, Space in the 70s. NASA's dream for a Mars base included a Mars rover. So von Braun was obsessed with life in space, and the government was obsessed with war in space. And for both of these things to be legitimate, you needed a car. I think that the lunar rover's navigation, which is fascinating, is actually a great metaphor for what's going on here. They didn't have GPS on the moon, So they used a dead reckoning system to navigate. The term is borrowed from sea navigation. It basically means that they precisely measured the direction and speed traveled relative to the lunar module. To get back, they could just reverse course to the starting point. This $40 million car, it was dead reckoning from what was going on Earth in the 1960s.
I'd like to quote a statement from Plutarch, which I think expresses our feelings. The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be lighted. Thank you.
So why make this video at all? Did you see a building catch a rocket? This was part of a recent SpaceX effort to catch the Super Heavy booster. People were euphoric. But the success of Elon Musk's SpaceX was sort of treated as a separate thing from the decision of Elon Musk to campaign alongside former President Trump. That's right, this is kind of an election video, but please don't click away yet. This lunar rover story kind of revealed to me how silly it is to put SpaceX Musk and MAGA Musk in two different boxes. In a political town hall in a high school in the Philadelphia suburbs, he was wearing an Occupy Mars shirt and was obsessed with one thing.
Race on Mars, and fundamentally build a city on Mars and make life multi-planetary.
You heard it, right?
And make life multi-planetary, and make life multi-planetary, and make life multi-planetary. I think that would be super cool.
I have come to believe that this is the only reason he's doing anything political at all.
People want Starfleet Academy, you know? Yeah.
I think that rightly or wrongly, he's made a political calculation to try to support the rockets. I mean, Wernher von Braun became a Nazi to develop German rockets. He joined the SS to develop German rockets.
It will be many years yet before our plans can fully materialize.
And then he became an American Cold Warrior just so that he could keep the space program going. In the absence of a Cold War to motivate people to get to the moon, to Mars, Musk is using a culture war instead. Now, let's say you think that take is hotter than SpaceX jet fuel. I get it. Go ahead and throw it out. But I still think that the lunar rover story shows that technological and scientific considerations when it comes to space travel, they are always secondary to political ones and even financial ones. We are reasonably in awe of the incredible footage and ingenuity, the lunar worms, and even the basalt. We often overlook the financial interests, political interests, and geopolitical competitions that make space travel a reality. What is my argument for that statement? We took 3 trips with a new type of spacecraft, a car that could drive on the moon. 50 years ago, we left it there. We haven't been back. Hey, that is it for this one. Thank you again to Delete Me for sponsoring this video. So again, to get your data removed from the internet, check out Delete Me via my link in the description. Get 20% off. There were a lot of sources for this. Chief among them was Across the Airless Wilds. Really thorough book, great journalism that was done, and it'll get you into all the nitty-gritty details of the contracting, but also some of the science that I necessarily had to kind of skim past. So check that book out if you want to really go deep on the lunar rovers. I've put other sources in my newsletter article. If you don't know, I write a newsletter that is totally free to get. It's on Patreon, but you can sign up and get it for free. And it has an aspect of the story that I just couldn't fit into the video. And this time it is about a science experiment that I think is pretty telling about the history of the NASA program at that time in general. So hopefully you'll go there and check that out. Patreon, of course, also supports this channel. And yeah, thanks for being here. I'd love to know what you think of my hot take. I hope that it didn't make you, throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I do think that the lunar rover history is really interesting without it. But, for me, it just unlocked this kind of epiphany. I was trying to make sense. Why is this guy so political all the time, all of a sudden? And I really do think it's all about the rockets for him. I think he's focused on that. But let me know if you disagree, and I will see you in the next one. All right, thanks for being here. Bye.